Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra,
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people.
associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked.
and sometimes what didn't,
You will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts.
And inspire you to do even greater things. In this edition of Software People Stories, Sivaguru from PM Power Consulting is speaking to Badri Narayanan Mangadu, Vice President, HCL Technologies, on the interesting impact of culture and how software development is adapted. Examples range from Japan to Germany, and also looking at the digital tsunami and how can individuals, leaders, and companies prepare themselves. Listen on.
Welcome to this episode of the Software People Stories, Badri. It's been a long time we've been talking about it. Finally, it's great to have you on the show. As we normally do, if we can start with your self-introduction, we will take the conversation forward from there.
Sure, Shiv. Thanks a lot for giving this opportunity, and thank you everyone for taking time and listening to this podcast. I'm Badri Narayanan Mangadu. I've been in the IT industry for the last 24 odd years. I both born in Chennai, did my education in ITBHU Varanasi, then MBA in IIM Bangalore. Been in the IT industry with various IT technology companies across India, US, and various geography, and currently working as head of delivery in HCL Technologies.
Oh, wonderful. You've actually traveled in various places, both for an education as well as your work. What do you see as the attraction of IT, maybe in all these different locations?
It's very intriguing. Cultural aspect of how various geographies and culture interact both with IT as a consumer as well as an enterprise is something which has always been very interesting for me. I was kind of jokingly telling one of my Japanese CIOs, right? So we were running a transformation program for 2.5 years. This is for a very large airline, right? Maintenance program, so super mission critical. And I was telling that for the same program, for same specification, same requirements, if I had to execute it in US, it would probably cost 1/3 and would have been executed in 1/4 of the time, right? And that is how contrasting two different geographies or cultural aspects of the program come into the play. But in leaving out the individualities, I think what is important is finally any IT, right, whether it's being consumed by the end business or end customers, need to fit into a context of that geography and that culture. So there is no point, and that program of in Japan is something which actually brought that aspect to me that there is no point you claiming that you can run a program or a project or IT in a much in certain way if it doesn't fit into the purpose of that particular geography and culture, right? And of course, there are other cultures like in Australia, which is again looking to adopt best practices. Europe has its own language mix. Each geography brings its own unique culture and unique kind of constraints. And the beauty of all of this is that obviously, technology per se, while it could be language and culture independent, finally, how it brings the benefits into an enterprise is where really that cultural aspect come together. And that's something which I think is very important for everybody to recognize, because otherwise the benefits of the program would never be accruing to the end business. And that's something which I have kind of imbibed through various of programs in my career.
Yeah, that's interesting, because while you say technology is probably the same, it cannot be culture neutral. And with a lot of emphasis today on the user experience, it is also about the user needs or what the user wants to do. So how do you translate those expectations into something that your teams can understand and have an empathy for the customer and their success criteria?
Yeah, and so it's not just the user experience, right? I mean, that's obviously something which can straight hits on your face, but everything from even project management of it, how do you communicate the status? How would some of the functionality be realized? How would end users really interact with the system? and what are the surround systems and how they communicate with, with system to system as well. So all of these aspects come together, and UX and UI obviously being the most evident part of cultural aspect or the geography aspect, right? And the traditional thought process is that you have to incorporate this end user interaction, more on-site heavy, and that used to be the traditional thought process. But what I have painstakingly learned in my career is that important aspect we kind of miss out on is really how much of really a local talent, right, in each of the geography we use on critical roles is a very, very important factor. And again, most kind of IT tend to give it as a tick in the box that I got X% of local talent in each of my geography. But what happens is if you haven't got, for example, business analyst like a traditional transformation program as a key role, and having people of belonging to individual cultures and geography performing that role, you would actually not be able to understand the usage of system from business context, right? So it is also the role mapping to cultural context, which is important. That's the first aspect. Second is traditionally what we used to call as conference room pilots, or business user experience, or obviously the agile programming. It brings out the user interaction in a very different concept. But to simplify it, I would just put all of this into one box of saying how involved is business through the SDLC process, right? Whether it as a product owner or in the form of giving requirements embedded into the whole program, any of these methodology, how involved are they and how much of buy-in is there, and it has to be a two-way communication. These are, I would say, are the top two critical success factors, right, in the context of geographically spread and geographically dispersed environment to be successful. And that's something which sound very intuitive. Most programs actually miss out on incorporating these best practices, and post facto cost overruns, you have missed deadlines, programs not meeting the business of goals. And if you can fix this upfront, you would have a much more successful enterprise IT in your hands.
Yeah, okay, a lot of questions. The first is when you talked about geographically dispersed or culturally dispersed and distributed teams with local talent. Two questions there. One is, what are probably some good practices or anti-patterns or something that you tried that worked or didn't work in creating more of an understanding team, more of the cultural empathy. At the same time, not letting that become more of a stereotypical reaction, saying that, oh, if it is a German in the team, or if it is a Japanese, or if it is an Australian, or if it is even from India with different regions, etc.
Yeah, so I will give two examples, one in Japanese market and the other one is in the German market, right? And fairly stereotypical, as one would call it, from a cultural aspect. Both had fairly different kind of learning for me. Japanese one, like the example that I was talking about. So traditional methodology is that, okay, you put a requirements person who will capture requirements, all documented. I kind of hand it over to engineers, and you would have India-based project engineers, software engineers who will just churn out code, right, using those requirements. So you had local people talking customers in local language, capturing requirements in Japanese, getting translated by translators, and this is like few years ago, where bots hadn't still come, and then getting the translated software specs being converted into code through India-based engineers. The workflow looks perfect, most cost optimal. You go in 6 months into the project, you got all kinds of issues, from how a single Japanese word can have so many interpretations and therefore completely botched up software code in your hand, to what is the intention behind what a Japanese business analyst would have documented certain thing, right? To how programmers don't look at the end-to-end concept and just look at each software specs as an individual requirement and just try to churn out code as a bot, right? Literally. So all of this resulted in a completely mismatched end output. And so what again I did was not rocket science. Obviously, science really good bilingual requirement analysts back to Japan who would interact with customers and who really bridge the gap between what Japanese business analysts would understand and what he or she had documented in Japanese, and which got translated into English specs, right? So that gap is where maximum issues. We sent people who had understanding of Japanese and English knowledge and fix that gap. So that is number one. Similarly, I also, since business users per se couldn't come, the conference room pilot as I was talking about, I got the business analyst of my team back at offshore to sit with bad programming, so to say, right? So because these are the analysts who would come really do a code review or do a pre-systems test, so to say, and really certify the product, right? So basically, I was trying to reduce that gap through that full SDLC lifecycle, cross-involving people, which is another reason why it took more time than what would normally take for a program. And it's not just the language, right? And we typically tend to associate lots of things to language. But so everything from project management methodology to culture to how the interpretation of yes or no in Japanese, right, as very different consequence. So that was all Japan, and very similar experience in German, though not a language aspect of it, but the importance of accuracy and precision in documentation got attenuated in a very, very different way in one of the German-based project that I did, which normally we wouldn't give so much of importance to. We look at functionality and the software delivered gets more importance than the associated documentation. But even the accuracy of associated documentation has as much a weightage as a software functionality, right? So the importance of that, and because that is what is used prior to go live, business uses the documentation to understand and accept the product as much as they review and test that software. So that kind of differences came out in a much more stark way in certain geographies, which if you don't incorporate into your methodology and into your program and project, you are never going to have a successful program. And that was the learning from two of those examples.
Very interesting. With IT becoming more and more closely integrated into the core business, they say that every company is now an IT company or a software company. What do you see as in terms of changing expectations from software engineers, engineering managers?
Sure. Several changes, I would say. So I would largely put them into two categories, right? So one is external facing or customer facing expectation changes, and second is internal facing from a skills and one. So let's first focus on the external one. So if you look at our whole Indian software industry, it has gone through change over the last couple of decades, from Y2K times where we used to do a very small portion of the project to delivering small projects in the end part of the life cycle, as to taking ownership of end-to-end projects, to now handling end-to-end support of our IT system. But I would say we are still, if you look at many of our programs, probably 90-95% of them, we are still not owning customers' IT, right? So if you look at functions like architecture, customers' IT strategy, roadmap for either at a system level or at an overall enterprise level, all of these key functions are typically not just owned by customer, but even the input or formation of many of these has a fairly less influence from traditional IOP. And obviously it's changing, we are improving, there is no doubt about it, but in general it's been a fairly less impactful on some of these areas. And then here comes the new tsunami, right, of digital wave, right? And digital has multiple aspects, right? It's one is obviously business coming closer to IT. Most of the business are demanding IT to be actually owned by business, where they're seeing automation to be part of them. They're seeing business productivity being driven by IT, therefore they wanting to own of all of this. Given that typically IOPs are not even owning traditional enterprise IT, here is a new situation where business, which is further away from IT, is kind of coming much, much closer, right? So you've got a new challenge now, where in the traditional value chain, you've got to move up to now owning the full IT, to now kind of being answerable to not just owning IT, but making IT more valuable to business. So those are two fundamental shifts that I'm seeing, that we have to really make a quantum leap, right? And literally do a dual crossing, right? And it's not going to be overnight where you'll be able to do. I'm sure there are some business transformation that we have been doing. Just that I see this shift happening much more rapidly, where all of this cloud and technology advances are all making that faster. Because by moving to cloud, what you are really forcing is that IT strategy decisions in terms of DCs, and you are basically taking it away, and it is becoming technology decision rather than enterprise IT decisions, right? So you are making those indirectly, just that it is to be more conscious and more direct. And then now using that to deliver business outcome will become the new imperative rather than just doing enterprise IT strategy alone. So that's the first set of challenges that I'm seeing, or changes that I'm seeing, where people have to be conscious about what they are owning. People need to have skills to be able to do both enterprise IT ownership as well as being able to deliver digital solutions using enterprise technology advances, right? So those are, some of the trends that I'm seeing from a external facing point of view. Now let's come to the internal, right? If you look at our own, what one would call as a pyramid or a bulge or whatever you want to call, right? So traditional software delivery used to have lots of program managers at the bottom and few people who will basically oversee the output of it from a quality point of view, and will also help convert requirements and that kind of stuff. And then project managers who will basically see this end to end, and then orchestrator who will see the customer stuff, right? So that's how we have all been building our IT engagements, right? So in this context, there are several new roles that is coming up in given that external change that is happening, which have not even been foreseen in our traditional pyramids roles per se, right? Who would basically own IT strategy? Who would be a technology strategist? And it is very easy to say a technical architect would do it, but the way that digital is evolving is that many of these technical decisions continues to be continuous actually, because what technology will starting off in the beginning of the program is not relevant or not satisfying you by the end of the program. And we have not envisaged architecture as a function to be that continuous in nature. And there is just one example. So software developer needs to have some of not just the digital skills from a technology skill, but architecture decision making, or technical board as you would call it, right? Architecture board need to have ability to not just put across his thoughts, but even maybe even make those decisions. So the roles per se is first of all going through a massive change. Technical skills obviously is going through a massive change, but these two are fairly obvious. But what is not obvious, I would say, from an internal perspective, is that there are very, very few people who are giving thoughts to how to bring all of this together, right? So for example, automation, we'll take that as an example. Lots of people talk about automation, but the single biggest factor of success in automation is identification of use cases. You got so many people who will churn out great bots, but you have very, very few people who can think of what to automate and how to automate, right? Rather than how to automate. So that critical piece of upstream work, which is thinking part of it, is actually missing in the digital world. And same thing with business-driven programs and ITs, and take any example. So I see that the approach that we are taking on the whole new enterprise and new digital journey is still traditional nature, where we are looking at a technology view rather than outcome view or end business view. And this is how I see ourselves putting various hats and reskilling ourselves and retooling, which I'm sure we will do. We have done it in the past. It's to be a very conscious relearning if you have to be successful in the new world.
Yeah. So traditionally, we've had a lot of engineering kind of discipline training, we're saying process and all that. And you also shared some stories where once you draw up a process, everything looks fine on paper, but when it comes to implementing it, there are all these nuances, cultural nuances. In this case, first of all, is the classification of software development as engineering right, in your view?
So I'm trying to question myself of late. I'm seeing more and more we moving away from that. The reason for that is the traditional engineering aspect, right, which is design and implement, is disappearing more and more. And we see this whole thing as almost like I don't want to call it art and make it a big thing, but if you look at painting, right, where painter would basically think through, look at the subject and evolve. It's not that the final picture is in their head, right up front. So I see a digital world of what you want to achieve as a business benefit to be evolving continuously in a similar way as a painter brings about painting, right? And I'm just giving a very stark example just to say why it is an anti-engineering kind of a thing, right? But what shouldn't be diminished is that the art of service delivery is still engineering led.
Okay.
But of the art of software delivery, right, which is basically the end business objective delivery, right, system delivery, is where I'm seeing more innovation led. So it is almost like dual kind of a thing, where the business side of it, the outcome part of it needs to be more innovation led. The internal engine part of it has to be a lot more engineering led. How you do testing, how do you ensure that all of the rest of the technology components all fit together. So I see double-edged kind of a stuff, and which is why traditional training and all of it is not going to go away. You just have to augment it with different roles, different thought process, and a different business outcome that you have to measure yourself to for success.
Yeah, it's an interesting analogy of an artist. But then when we say that software development is more like a team sport, when there are multiple people involved, how do we ensure that this picture that emerges doesn't become more like a graffiti with each one probably writing something in one corner?
Yeah.
Mainly in terms of the role of managers or leaders. You touched upon the need for the architect being involved continuously or throughout and then evolving it. So, do you see a change in the expectations or roles of managers or leaders as well?
Big time, big time. And what you really talked about is that, right? So basically the what and the how part. So what I'm saying is the what part of the IT delivery is what is going to be innovation led. How you deliver it is what is going to be still engineering led and still going to be systematic. So what we would call as really the managers are the people who have to bring both of this together, right? So because the how you're delivering needs to deliver the outcome, which is the what part of it, right? So the dichotomy of how one is completely innovation led and therefore constantly changing, and the other one which is being very systematic has to deliver a very dynamic thing, is what we are going through. Everything that you are hearing on the streets today, right? That the digital skills are changing, technologies are changing, very difficult to deliver programs to customer expectation, are all actually this particular dichotomy being exhibited in different words, in my view, right? And that's where we as leaders and managers really need to do the translation. And there is no one single silver bullet, right? And each program is different, and each program we have to reconcile that. So meaning you got to still convert that vision of a business program into more quantified storyboards and sprints and story points, right, at each sprint level, right, which either a product owner would do or you as leader need to put in process to ensure that it happens. And then how it gets transferred and digested by individuals in terms of technology components is really where the translation needs to happen. So both external facing process rigor that needs to be brought in, and internal facing output which fits into that engine and delivers at a faster pace, right? Because customers are expecting these output in sprint 0, sprint 1. You want quick show and tell for the business. Our traditional engineering mindset would just not allow that to happen. So we are coming up with all of this DevOps and all of it to kind of slowly fit into that model. But really what we are trying to do is really bridge this dichotomy and say, how can we make engineering driven process to be more nimble? At the same time, how can we force business driven innovation to be somewhat of smaller chunks which are digestible and will still be componentized and therefore be delivered in a predictable this thing. And if people can bridge this gap and set this expectation in a meaningful and predictable way, those are the future managers who are going to be successful. Those would be the digital managers which the industry is going to crave for. And unfortunately, nobody has spent time to document this either at a skill level or even from an expectation point of view. Everybody is running around looking for digital program managers and digital leaders, but articulating this particular skill set and creating a roadmap for people to develop the skill is what is required for even Indian IT industry to be successful in this new era.
Yeah, that was preempted my next question. Because I was going to ask, how do you train? How, as an individual, can one learn, at least at the speed of technology change, if not faster? With so much of changes happening.
Yeah, and this is actually the challenge that I've been grappling with while I gave a framework, but how to do it if you do it at the pace at which the industry is changing, then you are likely to going to be a laggard, right? Both as an individual as well as a company. But the successful ones are the ones who are going to preempt this from an industry trend point of view and going to do this ahead of the industry change, right? And that is what me personally, my teams, I'm trying to stay ahead of the curve, right? And that's where the challenge is. The reason for that is the biggest part of this learning, unfortunately, comes from experience. So you got to go through that one round of a digital program or transformation program or automation program for you to literally, I wouldn't say fail, but see through the challenges of it. And then comes time of reflection, because many people go through this and don't learn anything and then keep on doing it in the same pace, right? So you got to reflect upon this and some of the imperatives of this change and gone through almost like a self-introspection or a learning phase. And then I see improved implementation of some of these learnings. So this cycle of do it once, literally fail or have a small setback, and then introspect and then redo is the chain that I'm seeing to be most successful. And I've tried putting very, very smart people directly into the second phase of just introspect, where I feed them, let's say, with the learning and try to accelerate into the third cycle. It has not been successful. And obviously you can't put somebody to be directly in the third cycle. So this is my current loop of start small, maybe literally fail small, so to say, and then introspect, relearn, and then redo. I'm trying to see how we can short circuit. I haven't found a way yet, but at least I got somewhat of a predictable path to success. And rather than doing we must put everybody into a failure model, right? So where you can in a conscious way how to learn from this process. But I think as an industry, we need to do this in a more accelerated fashion. We need to do it in a more predictable fashion, and we need to kind of do it in a fast. That's something which I'm also grappling with, but at least I've got a way forward.
Oh, good. Now that we are getting into more of this futuristic crystal ball gazing type of things, in the business verticals that you have been associated with, what do you see as the use cases? You also talked about the need for identifying the use cases. Not just everybody now talks about AI, ML, or I want to add VR also to that. Where do you see those coming in and changing probably some things in your business?
Yeah, so I will give a couple of examples on two very different industries. So one is basically a logistics industry, right? We see data and obviously AI kind of driving both of them business in a very significant way. But example that I'm giving is how do you use data to predict future of a company, right? And then similarly, how do you predict future of economy from the company, right? So basically, if you look at 3PL, right? 3PL basically logistics providers who move goods from one place to other place. And so basically what we have tried developing is that how do you basically movement of goods across the globe, right, as a predictor of economy, right?
Okay.
So based on the last several quarters and years of data, we see a cyclical trend where movement of goods actually can predict when the next economic downturn is going to come, because the production and manufacturing cycle and consumption cycle is all linked to it. But at the same time, interestingly, today's movement of goods is also a predictor of my financial results of a particular company, because the more I move today, the more money I make today and tomorrow, right? So we have done this two-way linking of how our economy drives the goods and therefore the company, and how the company drives the goods and then finally in turn can give a prediction of the economy, right? So this is the power of data. And one would never have thought of such a thing 3 years, 4 years back, where one single company, obviously a company has to be representative for the industry, right? How can it predict an economy, right? So and we have find a very, very strong correlation based on algorithms that we have developed. It's just amazing correlation which we have been able to do through AI. And same thing with pricing and in a retail sector, right? So you got lots of these large retailers, right? Generic, retailers who, right, in most of the Western countries, who have lost what they represent, right? So if you go ask some of these retailers, what is your fastest moving SKU, they would actually not know, because I mean, I'm a general merchandise provider. I provide everything, right? So they tend to lose out what they have traditionally have stood for, right? Or rather, because there is nothing that they stand for, literally. And no, thanks to Amazons and Flipkarts and retailers, it has actually forced them to go and introspect and find out what is their most profitable for good, right? So, and then how much profit are they making on that versus what is the least profitable one, right? And how does it vary by store? And we are just amazed that some of the fairly unknown brand, their biggest selling SKUs happens to be a swimming shorts. And then whole advertising, actually, one would never imagine of certain brands being associated. You would never have see a retailer advertising for a swimming costume, right? So, but it's the most profitable one and biggest selling this. And so here comes the new ad saying, if you want to buy a swimming costume, please come to us, right? So completely different view of data based on what you can slice and dice using AI. This is the kind of value that even IT, going back to my previous point, can really bring to business and really help rediscover businesses and what they stand for, and hopefully stand up for the new world of disruption.
Okay, so I have a flip side question to that. With companies and probably industries depending so much on data and technology, recently we had this ransomware attack on Maersk, where their entire global operation came to a standstill for almost a week, which can impact because nothing could be loaded, unloaded, planned, moved, and all that. So when we depend more and more on technology, two aspects. I just wanted your views on that. One is about the security or the integrity. I'm not going into privacy. And the second is, yeah, partly you can say privacy. It is more on the ethics of using this kind of massive data that companies are building.
Yeah, I see it as a, first of all, one-way street, right? Whether to use data or not. So data is going to be the new oil, it's going to be the new power. So there is no turning back from it, right? It's just that the usage of it is going to be more powerful, more driven. So I see it only as a way forward. But that does not diminish the importance of security, right? It is only going to increase. So you will see more and more of investment on security, which is, I would say, near term. But I think, linking both security and privacy part of it, where I have seen very less common investment being done is really, I would say, what one would call as tagging of data. So there has been no industrialization or standardization of tagging of data, right? I'm not talking tagging from a point of nomenclature and data definitions, and all of that does exist. But it does not, all of this exists from the point of view of enterprise. It does not exist from a point of view of consumers, right?
Okay.
And that is left to discretion. So for example, if I am Badri, right, my age, whether that's private to me or not, should be tagged along with the data, right?
Okay.
So, and in the across value chain. So for example, I go to, let's say, Amazon stores my data, and tomorrow, let's say, Amazon sells my data to somebody else. The privacy part of it is all each individual's responsibility. So what I'm looking at is basically literally like a database world. You define character as a field and characteristics. Almost, data definition and characteristics of it, both from a security point of view as well as a privacy point of view. Wonder like that is what is really needed. And lack of that is what is, in my view, driving lots of this privacy concern. Because just like 2008 financial crisis, where the loans get consumed by multiple parties, and then the nature of the loan gets lost out, right? Over, it gets transformed multiple times. Same thing has happened to data, and more digital programs are going to convert data and massage it and kind of completely randomize it. But there is a need from an industry point of view to classify data in this context and ensure that it remains private, or rather to the extent of privacy, so to say, needs to be inculcated into the data itself. And same thing goes for security as well. And it doesn't, again, remove the needs for other security measures. These also need to be put in. But at a most fundamental level, it needs to be incorporated at the bottommost level. On top, you got to have security measures which avoid, Maersk kind of incidents from happening and taking the world to ransom.
Yeah, very nicely put. There are a lot more questions that come to my mind, but in the interest of time, I still want to ask you one question that I ask pretty much every guest. What is your advice or warning to people considering a career in IT?
Okay. So back in T's, right? So people said T career is way to go if you want to be living abroad, Then people start saying, if it is you want a future in IT, you want to go into this particular technology, Java is the place. Became mainframe before Y2K time, and then it all became .NET. Then a period of time, AD projects, development projects, then it's all digital. So see, it's been evolving. It looks like it's evolving. But I would actually, really put it in a much more simplistic fashion. In a lot of sense, IT industry hasn't changed. It's just that we are just moving, chasing one target to the other target. It has also remained, has evolved, but it has largely remained somewhat similar, right? So I would put a very, very non-IT characteristic to this whole thing, right? If you want to be successful, you got to be passionate. If you're passionate, and it holds good for any industry, but more so in IT industry, because it is going to be a disruptor. Whether you are in a retail industry, or you are in a telecom industry, or you are in a finance industry, IT is going to be central to all of this. So therefore, you are kind of literally you are going to be in the center of economy, and you're going to be center of disruption. To carry out such a disruptive work, you got to drive lots of passion, and you got to be going through lots of churn in terms of technology changes. And it's not an easy job, because in one industry, doing one type of role is much more predictable than working in an industry which cuts across all industries and is also evolving and changing continuously. So first attribute I would say is really the passion. Second advice I would attribute I would associate to this industry is really unlearning and relearning, right? Lots of folks, and if I look back at my own career, right, there have been so many setbacks and so many learnings from that. Many of us go into a shell and don't want to come out of it, right? So we kind of go in a unidirectional way. The future leaders in IT will be those who will really ready to unlearn what they've done, keep a completely open mind, and are ready to learn the new skills, right? And ready to see a new perspective, right? So that I would say would be the second most. With this, all other technical skills and everything else comes along with this. If you are good, in executing these two strategies, I'm sure you will be successful.
With that reassuring message, thanks Badri for coming on the show and sharing your experience and perspectives. I'm sure there are more topics to talk about. I will take a rain check for a series that we are planning to do probably sometime later in the year about IT couples.
Sure, Shiv. Thanks everyone for listening in, and all the best in your career.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Malavika for promoting the Software People Stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.